signs. What's your sign? This week we're going to be talking about Scorpio. Everything you ever wanted to know about having a Scorpio sun, Scorpio moon, or Scorpio rising, which is also called the ascendant, and just general Scorpio information. We'll start with the basics. The picture on the bottom left-hand side is the symbol for Scorpio. The picture in the middle is the picture of Pluto, which is the rulership that contemporary astrologers tend to give Scorpio. But it's sort of a contentious issue. Ancient astrologers believe that the ruler of Scorpio is Mars, and there are definitely some links there. Mars has a relationship with sex and sexuality, anger, fear, protection, violence, instinct, and this sort of visceral, primal connection to the earth and to the body. And you'll see how those themes play out throughout the course of this video with regard to Scorpio. Most contemporary astrologers see the rulership of Scorpio as being Pluto, and I think there's a compelling case to be made for that. Pluto's sort of it's a slower moving planet. It spends more time, it takes more time to thoroughly study and understand something. It literally just spends more time in one space. And I think that's an interesting sort of link for Scorpio. Scorpio is known for, for focusing full attention and intensity on something and really digging as deep as possible as you can into it. And that kind of energy to me isn't well matched by the energy of Mars, which is incredibly fast moving and doesn't stick around for long enough to see anything at that sort of deep depth. Pluto wasn't discovered until 1905, and then it was declassified as a planet in the early 2000s. So technically it's still a dwarf planet, but it's not considered like a full proper planet. It's a member of the Kuiper belt, which is something that I'm certainly pronouncing wrong, but that part of space is this sort of shadowy disc-like zone beyond Neptune. And I think there's something interesting about the fact that Pluto exists in sort of this dark, murky, mysterious part of space. And you'll see throughout the course of this video how that fits into the experience of being Scorpio as well. Because it's so far away, it's largely unknown. Like we know very, very little about it. We've got some recent images that have been produced by NASA, like the one in the picture here where we can see this sort of heart-shaped image at the top of the planet, zone area on Pluto at the top of the planet. But really, we don't know much about the composition of planet. We have a general idea of the elliptical of Pluto, but we don't know a ton about it. It's covered in ice, and I think that's sort of interesting. It's like, and I think that sort of fits in with some of the Scorpio energy, because I think that even though Scorpio is this really, this water sign, it's sort of this like languid, slow-moving, intense, deep water, like the water at the bottom of the ocean in the depths and in the darkness. And I think Pluto and Scorpio kind of describe this energy that, like I said, is intense and deep and beneath the surface in a lot of different ways. And there's a lot of things that we don't know about both the sign and the planet. And there's a lot of things that they have to teach us. So I think I'm not coming down on either side. I think, like I said, there are some good reasons that Mars could be the ruler. I think there's some excellent reasons that Pluto could be the ruler. And I think that there's a great case to be made for dual rulership, and it's really up to you which one feels right. The picture on the far, like the bottom right-hand side, is just like a natal chart, and I've included that there to show the different houses in the chart. Scorpio rules the 8th house of the zodiac. The 8th house is basically anything that you wouldn't say at a cocktail party. It's the house of all the things that we're not supposed to talk about, that are, we're supposed to sort of brush under the rug, or things that make people squeamish or uncomfortable, things that make people flinch. So it's the house of death, disease, dying, obsession, sex, sexuality, anything that's on the fringe is in that house. A lot of people also see it as the house of marriage, but and I think that that's true, but it's about the kind of relationship where you're so intimate that you can't hide your secrets from someone else, that you're sort of fully and completely exposed, where they can see your darkness and you can see theirs, and where you can see their light and they can see yours, and where, it's this really deep, intense kind of intimacy where you have to make peace with the fact that, nobody's perfect. So that's why we call it sort of the house of marriage, the things that you can't hide when you spend enough time with someone, the things that you stop being able to hide when you have that kind of intense physical and emotional intimacy with a partner. So we're going to talk a little bit about the myth of Scorpio. I've got two pictures because I think there are two myths that work well with Scorpio. The first is really the actual myth behind the constellation Scorpio. So basically, Orion, was acting like not a cool guy, and he decided that he wanted to kill all of Earth's wild animals. And as you can imagine, Gaia wasn't too happy about it. She got really upset, and she sent a giant scorpion to attack him, and eventually the scorpion killed him. And Gaia, I guess, honored the role of the scorpion in that battle by placing it in the night sky as a constellation. And I think a lot of that makes sense. I mean, I think, in terms of the archetype of Scorpio, I think that, the fact that Orion was trying to get at the wild animals, I think is interesting, because I really think at its core that Scorpio is about the wild, untamed part of ourselves. Those part of ourselves that are just, they're not integrated yet. They're visceral, they're primal, they're the things that we're not supposed to be, what we still are. They're all the things that don't necessarily fit in polite conversation. They're intense and they're powerful, and we're going to spend the rest of the video talking about what they look like, but sort of those wild, untamed parts of ourselves and our connection to that primal, visceral, instinctual energy. So I think that's really interesting. I think the actual, the body of the scorpion is an interesting symbol for Scorpio. You have, as you can see in the picture, you have this creature with this really, really intensely tough exoskeleton. It's got sort of pinchers in the front and a little stabber guy in the back, and it has all of this protective gear. So it's protecting, both passively and aggressively. It's protecting by putting massive, barriers between itself and the world. It's also protecting by attacking when it feels vulnerable or it feels threatened. But when it comes down to it, when you break through that barrier, all you get is this sort of gushy, succulent meat. And I think there's something that makes a lot of sense with that in Scorpio, because Scorpio is very emotionally intense. I think, I'm afraid to say this because I'm afraid someone will not like it, but I really think that Scorpio is the most emotionally intense sign of the zodiac. It has the ability to feel things on this really deep level that I think a lot of people feel threatened by or scared by, just the pure intensity of that emotion and that feeling. And when you feel things that deeply and that viscerally and that intensely, you have to create a way to protect yourself, to make sure that you're safe, right? If you have that kind of vulnerability, then it has to be matched by, having, walls and having something protecting you from the world, because you are tender and you are vulnerable. I think that's what Scorpio is this sort of incredible mix of intense vulnerability and intense emotion, and also, toughness and walls and privacy and keeping people out, And I think we'll talk about this a little bit more throughout the course of the video, but one of the things I always say in client readings is that Scorpio, particularly Scorpio Sun or Scorpio Moon, they make you earn the right to know them. They make you earn the right to be loved by them. They make you earn the right to love them. So it's really it's a sort of energy where you have to get through those barriers. You have to get through that tough exoskeleton to the center. But once you're in the center, it's this incredibly vulnerable, emotionally intense space. So that's the first picture. And the one beside that picture is a picture of Persephone. Scorpio definitely has a link to Persephone. So for anyone who listened to has been listening to the video series, we've talked a lot about, Persephone's mother, which is, you can call Ceres or Demeter or whatever you'd like. But basically the story is that Persephone was kidnapped. So she was a beautiful maiden, she was a virgin, she was very innocent, and she was kidnapped by Pluto and dragged into the underworld and became the goddess of the underworld. And so she amasses this incredible knowledge and wisdom and all that kind of stuff when she's in the underworld. And then her mother, through this sort of negotiation process, manages to get it so that she can spend half of her time above, in her mother's world, on the earth, partaking in the same kinds of activities that she used to partake in before she was stolen and dragged into the underworld, and half of the time in the underworld with Pluto as his wife. And so the story of Persephone is about figuring out how to have one foot in both worlds, right? Like one foot in the shadow and one foot in the darkness and one foot in that sort of incredible depths and one foot on land, right? It's about learning how to deal with that. And part of Persephone's journey is learning how to bring the wisdom from both to the other space, right? So she brings the wisdom of the underworld, of this sort of incredible depth, up to the land and makes it palatable so that other people can learn it without having to experience it themselves. And she also brings the wisdom of the land above, of this sort of happier, easier, shinier place, to the land below. And I think that's part of Scorpio's journey, is being the messenger, saying things that make people uncomfortable, breaking through this sort of shimmer of magical thinking and being honest about who you are and what the world is, and having real conversations and refusing to sit on the surface and pretend everything is as everyone says it is. So we'll talk about that a lot throughout the course of the video, but those two myths, I think, really well encapsulate the energy of Scorpio. So Scorpio is a water sign. And I've sort of talked about this a bit in other videos. The elemental association of a sign, it tells us a little bit about how that sign moves through the world, like the kinds of, not necessarily the kinds of experiences that sign draws, but like more like the vehicle that they move through the world in. So how they show up in life and how they show up in the world. And so because Scorpio is a water sign, it has some automatic associations around emotion, intuition. Those are like the two big ones, emotion and intuition. But it's just a sort of a different energy to come through the world with, right? And because it has that sort of link to both Cancer and Pisces, there's a common language that all three signs speak, and it makes associations between those three signs just a little bit smoother and easier. And I should say, I'm not talking about sun signs. So I'm not talking about, it's just because you're a Scorpio sun doesn't mean you're going to get along really well with someone who's a Cancer sun, for example. But if you're a Scorpio and you have, 6 planets in Scorpio, for example, and you meet someone who has 6 planets in Cancer, then yeah, you might get along pretty well, because it's not a single energy. You want to talk about someone who's running that energy in multiple ways, where that's a dominant energy in their life. So Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces have some common links. But if you're looking at the natural partner, the natural match for Scorpio is Taurus. So, in astrology, opposites attract. And when we talk about relationship astrology, we look at the sign that is in opposition to the sign that's on the ascendant as a sign of partnership. So someone who is a Scorpio rising would automatically have Taurus in the house of partnership. And part of that is that, you know, one of the best things that comes out of a relationship is that you can grow and learn through your interactions with someone else. And that happens best when you're not the exact same person as they are, right? You know, difference, opposites attract, and difference allows us to shift and grow and learn and change. So Scorpio sun. So the sun in astrology is sort of like who you are in stillness when no one is around and nothing is affecting you. It's usually how you define yourself. And so throughout the course of this video, you want to look at the parts of yourself, of your sort of essence, of your soul that are calling out to be healed, right? It might be behaviors that you do that bother you. It might be behaviors that you do that are difficult for other people. But I think for Scorpio, you know, one of the biggest lessons along the way for Scorpio, and one of the things that I really want to stress throughout the course of this video, is that really intense Scorpio energy tends to face judgment from others. And so one of the things that I want Scorpio suns to take away from this video, and just anyone who has really intense Scorpio energy to take away from this video, is that you're here, you're showing up exactly how you're supposed to show up. You know, like, you're not supposed to fit into a mold. You're supposed to push the rest of us to develop and transform by looking, you know, into the cracks and seeing what's beneath the surface. So, you know, part of the process that I want you to sort of think about throughout the course of this video is, you know, coming into a space where you accept yourself and realize that, you know, it's not always easy, but you're exactly who you're supposed to be, and that you're providing a service to everyone else through sometimes triggering them or making them a little bit uncomfortable. That's how you're catalyzing them to heal. Look at Scorpio moon. So the moon it's about emotion. So it's how we feel, what makes us feel, and how we demonstrate those feelings. So again, when you're sort of listening throughout the course of this video, the first step is always self-acceptance, but you want to listen for how you're showing up when you're not okay, right? So how those sort of shadow behaviors are sort of creeping out, what it looks like when you're in a healthy, happy, shiny place, and what it starts to look like when you're not in a healthy, happy, shiny place, and how to make different choices so that you're just showing up in a way that honors you and honors those around you. Scorpio rising or ascendant. So the ascendant or the rising sign, which are the same, they're the same thing. It's the lens through which the world sees you. It doesn't mean that it's something that you put on. It's not a mask that you wear. It's a really important, integral part of who you are. It just also happens to be the part of who you are that's most obvious to other people. And the challenge is, of course, that just because other people perceive you in a particular way doesn't mean that you see yourself that way. So part of what we look at when we talk about ascendant is whether other people see you the way that you see yourself, and if they don't, if other people see you in a way that you don't see yourself, then it can be traumatic and difficult and challenging. And so what ends up happening is that you find that the ascendant starts to run from a place of wounding or a place of hurt, which sort of exacerbates the situation. So, part of this is sort of listening to this video and identifying parts of yourself and owning that they are parts of yourself, and that you can see how they are showing up in your life, and making choices to run them in the healthiest way possible. The sign on the ascendant is, and throughout the first house, it affects the types of experiences that you draw to yourself. Okay, so the ascendant, the energy on the ascendant is the first energy the world experiences when it encounters you, and so we attract what we are, right? So it's just basic sort of manifestation, right? Like you whatever you put out into the world sends back to you. So Scorpio ascendant, you have to be quite careful to run this energy in the healthiest way possible, or you'll draw experiences that are just not healthy or self-honoring. So you just have to make sure that you do everything that you can to run it in the healthiest way possible. So the first thing I think we need to talk about when we talk about Scorpio is breaking taboos. So Scorpio, not only does Scorpio see beneath the surface, not only does Scorpio see the things that other people are pretending don't exist, Scorpio exposes those things so that other people have to face them too, right? So it's, the person who goes to the cocktail party and accidentally brings up something that leaves the host in tears, right? And I'm not saying every Scorpio is like that. They're certainly not. I'm just saying that Scorpio energy is this energy that forces us to look at things that make us uncomfortable, to dig beneath the surface, to dive into ourselves, deep self-diving. And so Scorpio is about breaking taboos, facing taboos, and exposing them. And I've got some pictures below. So, when we talk about Scorpio, we talk about the realm of Scorpio, the things that Scorpio rules or has a relationship to. It's things like sex and sexuality, death, disease, dying, obsession, all of these things that are sort of sitting beneath the surface that society wants us to pretend don't exist in the first place. All of those things are the realm of Scorpio. And that can be like really challenging, right? Because if part of your job in the world is to make people see things that they don't want to see, then it doesn't always make you the most popular person in the conversation. And so the result is that most Scorpios end up with really, really tall walls to protect themselves from the world because they feel that the world doesn't value what they have to offer. But at the core, what they have to offer is transformation and healing for anybody who comes who comes into contact with them, right? Because talking about things that are uncomfortable to talk about, they make them less scary. They allow everyone else to sort of integrate the wisdom and the knowledge within those subject matters that we're all avoiding, right? And it's sort of this idea that like, just because you think positive all the time doesn't mean nothing bad is ever going to happen to you. We're human beings. We chose to have lives that were full of things that weren't always pleasant. And so part of what Scorpio does is show us the value in things that aren't comfortable, show us the value in things that, we're not dealing with or we're not talking about. And it's about ownership of all of these parts of ourselves that have been erased or shamed or hidden, and coming into this place of wholeness and integration and peace. The other thing about Scorpio I want to mention when we're talking about taboos is that there's a very strong relationship between Scorpio and illness. Like I said, there's also a relationship around, death and dying and facing death and facing our own mortality and all that kind of stuff is all related to Scorpio. But people with a ton of Scorpio energy in their chart can often face health challenges and health difficulties. And the reason for that is really just that when you're facing illness, you have to face a lot of things, right? You have to face a lot of uncomfortable things that make you shift and change and grow. You have to face your own mortality. You have to face powerlessness. You have to face, a million different things. So it's one of the tools that Scorpio uses to help us grow and shift. And it's a really painful tool. But, one of the things that I like to really highlight when I talk to people is that, this sort of new age movement has done a lot to make people think that if you're ill, it's your fault. And what Scorpio teaches us is that, you're ill because your soul chose to experience illness so that you could grow from it and change through it and help other people. And it's painful. That doesn't mean you're not allowed to be upset about it or hurt by it, but it does mean that the universe wants you to realize that you're not sick because you did something wrong or because you thought something wrong. You're experiencing illness because your soul believes that it's the fastest path or the best path to spiritual growth. And I know that's easy to say rather than experience, but really what we want to do is just find a way to accept the wisdom in it and let go of guilt around it or shame around it, or those kinds of emotions. Yeah. So now we move into truth. So, Scorpio has a really fascinating relationship with truth. Really fascinating. On one hand, the purest, most beautiful, cleanest Scorpio energy is the energy that exposes difficult truths that no one else wants to see. There's a close relationship with social activism in Scorpio. There's a close relationship with journalism in Scorpio. It's the teller of secrets, not yours, other people's, or the world's secrets, right? It's digging beneath the surface and finding it, whatever it is that we're hiding, and exposing it so that you have to face what is in front of you, right? And so that's part of the journey of Scorpio. But what I think is kind of interesting about that journey is that that doesn't mean that Scorpio want to tell their own truths. It's even though the job of Scorpio is to tell the truths in the world, the uncomfortable truths of the world, to make us face what really is instead of living in this sort of bubble, as it were. Scorpio usually, even when it's healthy, has a pretty high wall between the self and others, and often is really hesitant to be vulnerable, to disclose to other people, and to open up. And usually that comes from early wounding, right? If you're shamed for telling uncomfortable truths, then you become afraid to tell the truth, or you become afraid to be vulnerable or to open yourself to someone else. So it makes sense, but there is definitely a sort of uncomfortable relationship with truth, because on one hand, it's your job to be the truth teller, and on the other hand, there's fear around having a role that's not always a popular one, and vulnerability around telling truths about yourself, right? Because if who you are the parts of the world that are hidden and taboo and different and all this kind of stuff, then it becomes difficult to share yourself with the world without fear of judgment. So Scorpio, part of Scorpio's experience, a really important part of Scorpio's experience, is about digging beneath the surface of things. I really like the picture of the iceberg. I think it's everyone thinks it's one thing, but it's a totally different thing. And Scorpio is not about the ice that's above the water. It's the ice that's below the water that no one else can see, or that no one else wants to see, or all of those kinds of things. And I was actually really nervous about putting together this particular slide in the video, because I'm pretty sure that I'm going to offend or alienate someone, but there was no way that I was going to be able to put together an entire video about Scorpio and not offend anybody. I feel like, part of the energy of the sign is facing that when you tell uncomfortable truths, or when you tell your truth, even if it's not someone else's truth, it can make people uncomfortable. And part of Scorpio is exposing the things that we don't talk about, and that we don't see, and that we don't face. And it is that sort of, Scorpio has that energy of the things that someone says to you that you flinch, or the pictures that you see that make your skin sort of crawl. It's this energy of facing uncomfortable truth. And that's not necessarily in the person. The person is a vehicle for that energy, right? They're the one who are telling. Scorpio energy is about telling uncomfortable truths, not about being uncomfortable truths. So digging beneath the surface, it's all of this stuff. I picked these pictures really specifically. It's, having real conversations about racism, like the two eggs that are being mean to the brown egg, or about homophobia, like the, gay guy who has a black eye, or looking at, what it actually looks like to be a transgender person who can't go into any washroom without feeling safe, or without feeling unsafe. It's about things like this picture here, which are about slut shaming and rape culture for women, and facing the fact that we are living in that sort of rape culture for women. It's about, all of these pictures here, you know, like living in developed countries and not facing the consequences of pollution, or looking at global exploitation, or looking at child soldiers, or looking at all of these things that make people incredibly uncomfortable to admit even exist, let alone have a conversation about. All of that stuff is Scorpio. That's all of the energy. And I'm going to change slides because I know that a lot of these images are going to be triggering for people, and I don't want people to feel triggered by them. But I think it's really, really important that, you know, we acknowledge that there's beauty in that energy. There's beauty in the energy that makes us look at things that are uncomfortable, because it's through those images and through those experiences and through that sort of reeling back that we take stock of who we are, and we take stock of how we're showing up in the world, and we take stock of what the world really is, you know, and you know, ignoring all of these things that are difficult and challenging, that just don't feel right. That doesn't make the world a better place. It doesn't make us better people. So Scorpio is the energy inside of us that allows us to see things that are uncomfortable, and see things that are difficult, and face things that we don't want to face, so that we can become better and change and grow through that process. And Scorpio is the part of us that can see all of this dark, difficult, shadowy stuff and say, okay, there's value in this. I just have to look deeper and I'll find wisdom. I have to look at a different angle and I'll see this in a different way, and I can make it better. So Scorpio is about facing the ugliest parts of the world so that you can change the world, and so you can change yourself in the world. And it doesn't have to be global. Of course, not all Scorpios are global. It can just be facing your inner demons. It can be facing difficult things inside of your relationship. It can be facing difficult things inside of your family dynamic or your work dynamic or any other situation. But it's looking at things that are uncomfortable to look at, and looking at things that nobody else wants to see. And then part of the role of Scorpio is exposing them so that everyone else has to face them too. And that's not always easy, but it is a service that, you know, it's part of the purpose of Scorpio, why you're here. And so that's, you know, hence this slide, which is facing hard stuff and finding peace in the shadows. One of my favorite, so I am conscious, I think it's pretty clear through the course of these videos that I'm a Buddhist, and I don't want to continually use just one religious background. So if there is someone who's watching this series and they do want me to explore a different belief system or ideology, or reference it more often, I'm 100% open to that. Just message me a story you'd like me to include, or you know, even just like post under the video. Like, I want to be as inclusive as possible. So just give me some good stories and I promise to use them, or at least try to use them. But one of my favorite stories is about Buddha and Mara. So, you know, Buddha is, obviously most people know who Buddha is. And he's sort of like under this tree and he's meditating. And all of a sudden he just has all of these flashes, all of these sort of incredible, ugly kind of things come up in his mind, you know, hatred and jealousy and fear and anger and spite and just all of these horrible, horrible things. And all of these horrible, horrible emotions are manifested in the form of this being called Mara. And so, you know, at first sort of Buddha sort of pushes Mara away, and the resistance just creates more intensity to the attack, or he feels like it's making it so that he's completely unable to feel the peace that he's feeling. And the only way that Buddha can possibly conquer Mara is when Buddha says to Mara to sit down next to him and meditate with him. And I think that it's a beautiful story. I'm sure there's really great stories in other religions, which, like I said, I'm more than happy to share links to or include in future videos. That particular story I really like, because I think when we hide from the things that are uncomfortable, when we hide from the parts of ourselves that are wounded or that feel broken or shadowy or difficult or that we're ashamed of, that's when they act up. And it's when we welcome them in and we find compassion for ourselves that they exist in the first place, that we learn to integrate them into our being, and that we learn how they can become part of us and we're still okay, you know? Like, I think Anger is the most intense when you're resisting it, but when you let it run through you, it pours out of you and you're clean of it, you're clear of it. And so, part of Scorpio's job is to welcome in that tough stuff, welcome in all that sort of messy, difficult emotion, welcome in all of those sort of thoughts that are uncomfortable and let them run through you, let them integrate into your being. And make peace with the fact that you thought them in the first place. And make peace with the fact that there's a part of you who judged yourself from thinking them, It's about integration. It's about self-acceptance. It's about letting go of resistance and accepting the really difficult, tough stuff in life. And accepting yourself fully, even the parts of yourself that you might not like very much. So with Scorpio and intensity, it's a Steve McCurry picture on the left-hand side. Unfortunately, the right-hand picture didn't have the photographer listed, so I don't know the name. Scorpio has one of the sort of ways that we describe Scorpio is intense. And that's good. It's good and it's healthy and it's shiny and it's wonderful. Scorpio is meant to be intense. It just want to sit around and talk about, the crab dip at a party. It wants to talk about something that's much bigger than that, that's deeper than that, that's more transformative than that, that's more intense than that. And so Scorpio can kind of get this reputation as being too intense or too, I don't know, like deep or something like that. And it's sort of this energy where you get judged for wanting to talk about things that really, really matter. And part of Scorpio's experience and part of having a healthy, shiny, happy Scorpio is being intense and is being passionate and is being, focused on one particular area or one particular subject. And so part of it is coming into a space where you own that part of yourself and you realize that part of yourself is a gift to the world. Like we talked about earlier with the mythology around Scorpio and Persephone, Scorpio is about facing duality. So, it's kind of arbitrary what we consider like the light parts of ourselves or like the good parts of ourselves or like those kinds of things, and what we consider the bad parts of ourselves or the things we need to fix or heal or change or whatever, right? It's arbitrary, it's cultural, it's based on your upbringing, the family that you grew up in, the family you grew up in, the time that you were born, when you were born, all these kinds of things. So, there's definitely some sort of arbitrary things about what's considered good and what's considered bad and what's considered right and what's considered wrong. I think there's some universal rights and there's some universal wrongs, but there's also ones that are more arbitrary and that are more, contingent on the time in which you were born and all that kind of stuff. And so I think part of Scorpio's journey when it's healthy and shiny and happy is to find a way to have one foot in both worlds, right? So just like Persephone on her journey learns from that sort of shadow, that darkness, that like intense deep self-diving and personal exploration where you're digging into your subconscious and you're digging into your psyche and you're, looking at all of the thoughts that you have that make you uncomfortable and looking at yourself fully and wholly in this sort of intense, powerful way, or you're looking at the world and you're looking at the things that no one else is seeing or no one else is acknowledging, but you're also able to come out of that and come into a space where you find pleasure in life and where you find joy in life and where you find happiness in life. So it's creating a balance, which is really important, of both, experiencing things that are difficult and experiencing things that are joyous and blissful and happy, and also creating this sort of balance where you understand that there might be parts of you that are not integrated and parts of you that are disowned and parts of you that are unhealed, but that doesn't make those parts of you bad. And so it's about learning, coming to a place of acceptance of your own duality, acceptance of your own life experience, acceptance of who you are in this moment, and knowing that even if you want to dig deeper into yourself and even if you want to heal yourself and even if you want to become better and change and shift and grow, that doesn't mean that who you are now is wrong. So it's integration, it's self-acceptance, and again, it's learning how to keep one foot in the light and one foot in the shadow, and not disappear and do a swan dive into the dark, shadowy stuff, and not all of a sudden start pretending that all of the, shadow, intense, powerful self-exploration stuff doesn't exist, right? Because one of Scorpio's greatest gifts is its ability to look at the self, to understand the motivations behind other people's actions, to understand the motivations behind your own actions, and to look really deep into people and into situations, and to understand the unconscious and the, subconscious and the behaviors of others. Scorpio has a relationship with transformation. I feel like Scorpio is constantly in some sort of stage of growth. Some of it's more comfortable than others, but I think Scorpio is always on the way to being something else. Like I said, it's in the 8th house, has a relationship with death and dying, and I think the interesting thing about death and dying is if you sort of take it out of the societal context, where we put like value judgments on one versus the other, we kind of see that the process of death and dying is a transition. It's one of the most amazing transformations that we make, is from ethereal form into physical form into ethereal form, right? And so Scorpio's life experience is also about that constant experience of transformation and change and personal growth, right? I think Scorpio has an incredible appetite for personal development and for personal growth. And so part of the experience of being a Scorpio is being a million different people in a single lifetime. And so now we're going to talk about where there's an ouch. So when things aren't shiny and happy and fabulous, and when all the stuff that we talked about earlier isn't sitting well, or where you're feeling really judged, or where you're having a difficult time in other areas of your life, this is where things come up. So where there's an ouch, boundaries and walls. So I talked about this earlier. Scorpio naturally has walls. It's not your job to tear them down. It's not your job to, not have any boundaries between you and other people. I'm not saying that it is. You have every right to expect people to, earn the right to see you vulnerable, right? You have every right to do that and every right to be that, right? But the challenge is that you have to eventually let those walls down, or you never get to feel what it's like to be loved. And you deserve to be loved. So you need to figure out a way to still have those boundaries and still have, those sort of protective elements around you, because that's not going to change. But at the same time, you have to make sure that you're not blocking anyone else from coming into your life by not letting anyone else see who you are, or how you feel, or what you think life is about, or who you think you are, or who you think they are, right? So it's about having walls that are so high that no one else can get in, right? And those are emotional walls. Sometimes they're physical walls, but mostly emotional walls. And so it's about learning how to have walls that don't block out the light. And it's about learning how to have walls that you allow down every once in a while, right? And learning how to let other people in, and learning how to trust other people, and learning how to open yourself to other people, because like I talked about earlier, part of who you are is that squishy kind of meat on the inside, right? It's that sort of emotional, intense, vulnerable part of yourself. And part of Scorpio's job in a life is to find a way to show someone that emotional, intense, vulnerable part of yourself, to learn how to trust that much and to step into that space. Secrets and obsession. So Scorpio, more than any other sign, is definitely known for having secrets. I think it can happen in like a, sometimes it's like a mysterious way. Scorpio is known for being mysterious, withholds information and withholds parts of the self in order to protect the self. That's part of the walls and the protection that we talked about in the last slide. And that's not always a bad thing. It's self-protection. I'm not saying that you're not allowed to have that, but a lot of times Scorpio keeps secrets for no other reason than it likes to keep secrets. And so I think where there's an ouch, you know, when things are not safe and things don't feel good and you're having a difficult time, then you can just close yourself off from the world completely by keeping secrets, you know, never letting anyone else in. And then you just isolate yourself. You end up sort of in this emotionally barren landscape where, you know, the rest of the world has no idea what's going on for you in your life, right? So when things aren't going well, you have secrets. And I really like the picture of the cat who's obsessed with the fish. But there is this sort of like, you know, Scorpio rules the, I guess sort of the subconscious mind. And it's sort of, there's this definite element of like obsession to the energy of Scorpio when it's unhappy or unhealthy. So when things are really rough, when you feel unsafe, when you don't feel loved, when you feel judged, when things are just not turning out the way that you want them to be in life, you can come into a space where you become really secretive, where you block other people out, and where you become obsessed with people or issues that are not nearly as big as you think they are. So you kind of spin on the same issue again and again and again and again and again, and won't let it go. And that's just a tool to distract you from the real problem. So it's redirecting your focus onto something that doesn't matter because you can't face dealing with something that does. And of course, similar to the last slide, you want to use that powerful mind of yours to, you know, that's sort of trying to that's obsessing on something, to break down what's really going on for you, to sort of dissect it and figure it out and work through it and figure out how to use it to your benefit instead of have it work against you. Where there's an ouch, depression, and pessimism. So, you know, we talked about this earlier. Persephone spends, you know, 50% of the time in the underworld and 50% of the time on top of the earth, playing and laughing and joking and doing hopscotch and stuff like that. And so when things aren't going well, for Scorpio, sometimes you can disappear into the darkness. You forget to keep a foot above water or your head above water, or you forget that you're supposed to spend 6 months of the year up top in that happy, joyful, pleasant place. And you disappear into the darkness, into the shadows, and into the underworld 100% of the time. And so, you know, there's a really strong relationship between Scorpio and really uncomfortable emotions like depression, like we talked about earlier, obsession and pessimism as well. So just because you can see what's not right in the world, what needs to be changed and shifted and fixed inside of you or inside of your relationships or inside of the world, that doesn't mean that everything needs to be shifted and fixed and changed. So it's about being able to see what's not working, but at the same time knowing that there are good things in life and that there are things that are working. And part of that, it takes a conscious effort to like literally pull yourself out of that shadow, pull yourself out of the darkness, come into the light, and realize that there are good things in life and that there are good people in life and there are, you know, wonderful things that you can learn from and grow from. And that even though there's power and there's beauty in the shadows, and even though you can really learn from them, that doesn't mean you have to become them. Where there's no jealousy, so this sort of fits in this sort of obsession area, right? Like when things aren't going well for Scorpio, you sort of want to hold on really hard to either possessiveness. You want to hold on really hard to what you have and get as much control as possible, or you kind of look around and the world seems like this bleak and dismal place and everybody else is in a better place than you are, and it's sort of this like intense sort of self-pitying energy where you can see all of the bad stuff in your life and all of the good stuff in the other people's life. And that's like Persephone's journey, except for like this time, you know, all you can see is bad for you and good for other people, right? And so the journey of Scorpio is being able to have balance, right? See good for you and bad for you. See things that are difficult for other people and things that are not difficult, that are really great and working for other people. But again, it's a sort of that balance that you have to come to, and coming into a space where you realize that you are where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be, always. And learning to accept that that's true even when things aren't the way that you want them to be. where there's an ouch manipulation. So Scorpio has people with really strong Scorpio in their chart typically have the ability to read people really well. They can read people really well. They can understand people's motivations, why they're doing, what they're going to do next. They have minds that have the capacity to figure out other people, right? To work through those sort of puzzles, right? And that wraps back into the fact that Scorpio has a relationship with psychology, and the mind and cognitive processes and the unconscious and all that kind of stuff. And when you have all of that power, which it's power, when things are difficult, when you don't feel safe or you don't feel okay, or the world around you feels like it's crushing in, then you can use all of that power that you have, all of that wisdom that you have, all of those skills that you have to get people to do what you want, in order for you to feel safe and loved and okay, right? So you don't want to judge yourself for it. You're doing those things because you feel unsafe and you're trying to protect yourself, but you have to respect, of course, other people have the right to determine their own destiny. So even if you feel like they're doing the wrong thing, or even if you feel like even maybe they're making bad choices, you still don't have the right to control the choices that they make or manipulate them into making the right choices. And so that's part of the journey of Scorpio, is like being able to see what everyone else is going through, being able to understand the psychology behind everyone else's decisions, being able to see your own psychology, being able to see your own shadows, being able to see your own difficulties, being able to see your own subconscious reactions and actions and motivations, and knowing all of that information, but not using that other information, all of that information, to gain control or to manipulate other people. And also integration, right? Again, you want to sort of ask that part of yourself to come and sit down with you and make peace with it, and let go of your judgment around it so that you can let it go, right? And interesting. And so this is the last kind of slide, and here I want to sort of talk about possibilities. Like, I talked about some of the amazing things about Scorpio in the beginning, but these are like the best things about Scorpio, right? So we'll start with the top left-hand picture. It's a guy screaming at a lion, and the lion screaming back at him. And I really love this picture. For me, I feel like it so beautifully encapsulates Scorpio. This just incredible courageousness and fierceness, and again, that sort of visceral physical connection to the world and to the wild thing inside of all of us, the thing that links us back to everything that we've ever been and everything that we ever will be, this sort of really beautiful part of us that connects us to the earth and the land and nature and all this kind of stuff. And the reason I love this picture so much is because I feel like, Scorpio is so brave, it's so brave. It's willing to stare head on at things that are terrifying to everyone else. It's willing to look at things that are uncomfortable, and willing to face things that scare the crap out of them, and willing to dig into these like amazing, incredible, uncomfortable situations in order to be transformed by them. And I think, that's an incredibly beautiful quality, and I think it's a quality that allows Scorpios to heal and change and grow and transform themselves in the world around them, right? And I think it also sort of allows Scorpios to I don't know, confront things that aren't right, to confront things that aren't working, and to confront things that aren't right, and to face really difficult challenges. And the picture right beside that on the top right hand side is just the process between caterpillar and butterfly. And I included that because Scorpio is so much, like I said, about transformation, Scorpio is about being 1,000 different people in a single lifetime, because you're constantly growing and shifting and evolving and transforming and changing. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. But I think if you look at sort of what happens when you're inside of that chrysalis, it's you're basically completely changing who you are, and it's not always a comfortable process. Sometimes you feel like you're stuck. Sometimes you feel like you have no idea what's going on in your life, and you have no idea what's happening next, and you can't see anything because you're stuck inside of this little chrysalis, right? And then you have to use all of your force to rip that open and come into the world as a brand new, changed, shifted, healed being. So I think the process of transformation is uncomfortable. It can be really painful. And I think part of the reason that Scorpio rules transformation in the first place is that you have to be willing to be uncomfortable to change your life. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable to change yourself, because, change is uncomfortable, and internal change is even more uncomfortable. Every time you strip away a layer of your ego, it hurts. Every time you let go of a part of yourself that's wounded, it fights back and it tries to hold on, right? And so the process of transforming and shifting and changing, it means letting go of parts of yourself even when they're fighting to hold on. And it means letting go of parts of yourself even when it's comfortable. And it means, becoming something before you understand what it is that you're becoming. And all of that is challenging. And that's the journey of Scorpio. It's constant death and rebirth and death and rebirth and death and rebirth, right? And that's not always comfortable, but it is incredible and beautiful, right? The picture on the bottom left-hand side, I chose this because I think Scorpio, I think it's a classic example of how we've disowned this part of ourselves that's like really sacred, and that Scorpio allows us to reconnect to. So the picture is of a man and a woman who are obviously in some sort of physical intimacy, and you can see these like massive energetic waves that are rolling off of them, right? And this sort of process of ecstasy and transformation that they're experiencing. And I think part of the thing is that there's so many things that we as a society have disowned inside of our culture and inside of ourselves that have this incredible potential to enrich our lives and make them better, and to allow us to experience this like incredible pleasure. And I think sex and sexuality is one of those things that, like, Scorpio has a really close relationship with sex and sexuality. And I think that by disowning sex and sexuality and disowning our sexual selves and shaming our experience of sex and sexuality, we lose that sort of sacredness of sex and sexuality. We lose the sacredness of sex. We lose how that connects our spirit to our body, how that connects us to something bigger than ourselves, And I think that part of what Scorpio brings into the world is this willingness to look at things that other people have disowned, but that have the ability to enrich our lives and our world and our culture. And I picked sex and sexuality because I think it's one of those things that we don't talk about enough, and one of those things that Scorpio allows us to open ourselves to more. The middle picture, that's just deep self-diving. So I think, like I talked about earlier, Scorpio at its best, at its very best, with this pure, clean, beautiful energy, has the ability to sort of deep dive into the deepest depth and deal with whatever it finds there. And the most extraordinary depths that you can dive into is yourself, and to look at yourself with fresh eyes and with clear eyes, and face all of the things that are uncomfortable, but also not judge yourself for them. And I think Scorpio has the capacity to do that, to dive into themselves and to not sort of wince when they find something that they've disowned, or wince when they find something that reminds them of something that's really uncomfortable. And I think that makes, Scorpio energy allows us to heal ourselves, because it allows us to face ourselves in light and shadow, and deep self-diving is a big part of that, right? Looking at how we could be better, and what parts of ourselves are wounded, and where the shadows are, and where the challenges are, and where the difficulties are. And through that process, which is incredibly uncomfortable, transforming into something extraordinary and beautiful as a result. And then the last one, I have a picture of that says speak the truth even if your voice shakes. It's not like exclusively Scorpio. I think Scorpio can see this truth, and typically the truth spills out. But the truth is that if we pretend things aren't happening that are happening, if we pretend things are okay when they're not okay, then things never change. They stay bad. They stay uncomfortable. They stay so that they're not serving everybody and they're just serving a few, or they stay so people are getting hurt and no one's standing up for them and helping them and protecting them, you know? And like Scorpio energy it's the energy of social work. It's the energy of counseling. It's the energy of therapy. It's the energy of international activism. It's the energy of local activism. It's the part of us that's willing to look at what's uncomfortable in the world and do something to change it. And I think that's amazing. That's how the world changes, right? The world changes when you speak, even when your voice shakes. You change when you say things that are so uncomfortable to say that your voice shakes. But once you say them out loud, you strip all of their power away and you're transformed by them. And I think, you know, the beauty of Scorpio, the light of Scorpio, is to find the beauty in the darkness, find the beauty in the shadow, find the beauty in things that make other people uncomfortable. And that's an extraordinary gift to give yourself and the world. Thanks for listening. This was Bonnie with Heal with Astrology.